So thank you all for joining me this afternoon. This is a session of information that the past year, 2 years maybe, I've been doing a session for students and hoping to offset some of the issues that come into play towards the end of completing the thesis or dissertation, and that's not working. So I thought, well, let's try a different approach and let's talk directly to the chairs. And so I'm going to go through some information. Some of it, if you've been chairing students for a while, may not be new. There are some pieces that are new, so I hope that we can use these tools that we're putting in place to support the success of the students. After I go through this, there'll be plenty of time to ask questions, so please be thinking about what you want to ask, and I'll answer those at the end of the presentation. But here's the purpose. It really is about disseminating information specific to this last semester where students are trying to finish the thesis or dissertation. And the goal is to like smooth out this process for them, and also to ease the burden. So my burden, I feel bad saying that, but I spend a lot of time at the very end. Like, these students submit their stuff to ProQuest and they think they're finished, and it turns out there's a lot of formatting and stuff that still remains to be done. So I'm trying to like get that off of my shoulders, because I'm coming in at the very end, and like facilitate a way for them to get that feedback early on. So that's my goal, or the purpose of sharing this information today. I want to start by just making sure we're on the same page when we talk about the different formats for thesis and dissertation. So this is just to clarify, make sure that we're using terminology that has the same meaning. Uh-oh, now I'm getting the rainbow death of wheel. Okay, here it goes. All right, so we start with the traditional format. And so this is the majority of thesis dissertations that I receive. So you'll see the traditional like 5 chapters. Sometimes there may be a 6th chapter thrown in. We have the information at the front, which I call that the front matter. That's your table of contents, your abstract, and so forth. And then after the 5 chapters, we see the references, and then we see the appendices. And so this is what I would call the traditional format. At UCA, we also have non-traditional formats, and they fall into 2 categories. One is the format that the MFA in film, as well as the MFA in creative writing, use. So their theses are very different in the sense that, like, they're creating a film or they're writing a book of some type. So they have their own formatting guidelines. And then we also have what I call the alternative format. And some people refer to that as a manuscript format as well. So when it comes to those, there is some information around the MFAs in the graduate school guidelines, but those programs have their guidelines that talk all about that stuff. And so that's where, you know, we send students to learn about the formatting for those. In terms of the alternative format, it was about 2 years ago, maybe 3 now, I'm not sure, that we all came together and talked about the manuscript formats and what we might do to kind of bring it in where we were all sort of on the same page with what that looked like as a campus. And we created graduate school guidelines. So I put them in quotation marks and said they were new. They're not really new. They've been out long enough now that I feel comfortable saying to a student, okay, you've got to go back and redo this, because these are the guidelines that you were supposed to be following. That alternative format, I've got the rainbow wheel again. Come on. There it goes. Okay. So you can have 1 manuscript, 2 manuscripts, 3. It's up to you and your program how many manuscripts are part of this alternative format. But what the graduate school guidelines say is that each manuscript should be converted into a chapter. And then the thesis or the dissertation needs to have these bookended chapters. So an introduction that says, okay, here's what's upcoming in this thesis or this dissertation. It describes kind of the organization of it. And then the conclusion would be like, okay, now that you've read that, here's how those things go together. That introduction and that conclusion chapter that are tying it all together, they don't have to be very long, you know, just a few pages, but it helps to bring all of it together, particularly when those manuscripts are can be very different. So it'll explain some of the relationship between those 2. Within the alternative format, we still have the front matter. And we still have the references and the appendices. But one of the differences between this and our traditional formats is that the references or appendices and things that go with the particular manuscripts follow those chapters. So, and I'm assuming y'all can see my pointer scrolling around. Over here on the right, these references and appendices are the ones that are referenced in chapter 1 and chapter 4. These chapters right here have their own references that appear after each chapter because they're part of the manuscript. Another way that you might see an alternative format, we have some programs that will have a student prepare a manuscript, and then they'll have like what they call an extended literature review, and maybe even an extended methods or an extended results, whatever those are. So in this alternative format, we would see each of those as different chapters. We would then still see those bookended chapters that have the introduction and the conclusion, front matter, references. None of that's changing. The order doesn't matter. So like if you want to do, let me go back. If you want to have the extended literature and the methods first and then the manuscript, or if you want to have the manuscript and then the extended, like all of that is at the discretion of your program and your you as the chair. But what we're asking you to do is make sure you have this introduction and this conclusion that piece all of that together. And of course, if you're going in this route, the manuscript is the piece that can have its own references right there in the document. So now that we have some terminology and we've seen some images related to these different types of thesis or dissertations, then I do want to talk a little bit about formatting those, because this is where like I get bogged down at the very end. So one thing, and this changed a year ago, like we no longer require the committee signature approval form or the permission page that the student signed off. So these are not actually a part of the thesis or of the dissertation. We're still seeing students stick those in there. So that would be one area that we just want to say out loud, don't put those in there in the document anymore. We use a digital routing form for the committee signature, and I'll mention that again in a moment. And the permission page is now printed and handed to the library, so it's not a part of the document. And today I'm introducing a formatting checklist. So this is my attempt to try to support students in getting these things taken care of early in the process instead of at the end. So what I've done is create this 2-page checklist. So that's all of it. It's 2 pages. And everything numbered on here that you see, these are things that are very common that I run into, that I find myself saying over and over and over to our students. Just as an example, I'm making this a little bit bigger so you can see a few of these. These are all common issues. So when you look at like number 5 there, it is not uncommon that they have the wrong month and year on their title page, or they'll put a page number on the title page and it's not there. So what I've done is I've reflected back and I've looked at some of my records. These are all very common issues that I've noted. I've created this checklist. I will send it to you after our meeting. And my hope is that you will either yourself look through those and make sure that when they are preparing their document that all of these things are checked off and everything's formatted correctly, or you hand it to the student and say, I expect you to go down this list, and if there's anything on here, ask me a question if you don't know what it's talking about. Because what I'm going to do at the end is use this same checklist. And if I get, 3 or 4 in and I'm not seeing those, then I'm just going to return it and say, here, go down this checklist and talk to your chair if you have questions. So I'm hopeful that by providing this earlier in the process, this won't be a big hiccup at the end, and it will make for a much smoother finishing up process for everyone. Again, this is just a glimpse. It actually looks like this. So there's 39 items, and the last group of them are all related specifically to if you're using the alternative format. Hopefully they're pretty straightforward, and I'll send that to you all so that you can begin using it with your students. Deadlines and forms. Oh, come on. Now I don't even see a cursor. Do y'all see my cursor? I don't see my cursor. Oh, we have movement. Okay. Okay, deadlines and forms. All right, so these are all the deadlines for this semester, and this recording will be available as well as the PowerPoint. But the application for graduation has already passed, so that was June 12th. But we continue taking applications throughout the semester. The issue is that at some point, the student will not be included in the program. So we want students to go ahead and apply early so that we can do those audits and make sure they're actually going to graduate this semester. When they apply, if they're not going to be in the program, Jennifer lets them know that. We don't have a real sense of when that actual deadline is. So we just want them to apply and apply soon. The next deadline will be the notice of defense, and there's not an actual date for that, but usually those notices go out a couple of weeks before the defense. You should have your students notify your college dean, and when they do that, include the draft of their thesis or dissertation. And we say that because some of the deans want to be able to read and provide feedback, and so they need to be doing it at this early stage and not later in the process. For the graduate school, we have a form, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. It's a digital form, so we use that for you to notify us. The deadline for defenses is July 15th, and then 1 week later is the deadline for submitting the final draft to ProQuest. So this is the draft that the whole committee has signed off on. The chair has said it's good to go, and they're uploading it to ProQuest, and it's at that point that I have the opportunity to read those. So once they come into ProQuest, I read them and I provide feedback, and it usually takes 2, maybe sometimes 3 rounds of revisions to get everything finalized. But again, I'm hoping that checklist helps with that. And so then I'll say, okay, congratulations, your thesis or your dissertation has been approved. And at that point, I give them directions on how to submit their final copy to the graduate school. And that final copy is due by August the 8th, which I believe is a Monday. It's usually the Monday before commencement. So those are the deadlines for this semester.
Can I ask a question at this point?
Sure.
You mentioned sending a draft of the dissertation to the dean of the college. I mean, so in my case, it would be Nancy Reese.
Right.
Okay. Is there a deadline for that, or is that like a mandatory thing?
I mean, you could talk to Dr. Dean Reese and see if she wants them. We've had some deans say yes, they want to see it. And, you know, so whenever it goes to committee, so to speak, is when you would send it also to the dean. But Nancy may be one that doesn't care to see it. I don't know. So you could just check with her, but we don't have a certain deadline for that.
It's a courtesy more than a requirement.
I would say that depends on the dean.
So I'm not balking at it. I mean, I'll certainly, if they want to read them, I'll send it to them. But I just I never heard of that before. So have I missed out in all these years that we didn't send them?
Well, I mean, we changed the process 3 or 4 years ago at the end. Like, we used to turn in the hard copy and we would do ProQuest last. And it was when we changed that process that some conversations were had. And I know that Dean Addison was one that, like, he wanted to be able to provide feedback. And if he was seeing it at the end, that wasn't enough time to do it. And so I know he was one that wanted to see it early on. And so at that point, we just said, okay, we will tell students that when they send that draft, it needs to go to the dean as well. But I can't speak on behalf of the other deans. Like, Dean Reese was not a dean at that moment, so I don't know what her perspective would be on that.
Okay.
So that was the point where that conversation started. So it's probably been 3 years, maybe 4 at the most.
Maybe I should have known. I feel okay.
Well, again, you know, that's why we're talking today, because I've been telling this to students all along. And probably sent out one email at the beginning, or, you know, anytime we make a change, we'll send one email out. But I don't know that that's been happening. So I would say talk to Dean Reese and see if she wants to see it at that point. That help, Mark? I think that's Mark Menemeyer talking. Okay.
Yes, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I mentioned several forms, so I do want to talk about the forms. So as the thesis or dissertation chair, there are several forms that you are responsible for initiating these. So we have the thesis dissertation announcement form. This is a digital form. The link to this form, as well as these others, is on the graduate school webpage under the tab forms, and you'll scroll down and you'll find it. This digital form asks you to put in like the title and the committee members, etc. And that is used to then notify campus. So Jennifer gets that information. She puts it in UCA Inform. She also sends it out to program coordinators, I believe, and graduate faculty. So that's our way of getting that information, streamlining that process and getting it out to campus. Then we have the thesis dissertation defense approval form. This is, again, it's a digital form. It has to be initiated by the chair. This is the form that's replacing the old committee signature form that used to show up in the thesis or dissertation. So this is where people are signing off and saying, okay, I approve this particular document. It needs to be submitted prior to uploading that final draft to ProQuest. If someone uploads to ProQuest and we have not received that form, Jennifer will reach out to you and say, hey, we need this form. But that's when we need it, because I don't want to review the document until I know that the committee and all have approved it. Also, at that same time, we need your plagiarism check. The plagiarism check is conducted within Blackboard, and it should be submitted prior to the ProQuest upload. We don't have, like, if your percentage is below a certain number, then it's okay. We don't have that information, because really it just depends. So we're counting on you all to take that report, go through the document, and make sure that there are no issues. A lot of times the pieces that are, copied, so to speak, are references or the front matter, like some of the language on the title page and stuff like that. So, we don't ever expect to see 0%, but 100% is a problem. And if you have 100%, that probably means that the document was already in Blackboard. So as you run into issues like that, we can try to help you. Jennifer and I are not like necessarily the Blackboard experts, but we can point you in the right direction. But it should be the same process that you use in any class that you have that a student's enrolled and they're uploading a paper. It's that same process, because they're enrolled in a class with you as the instructor for their thesis or dissertation hours.
Dean
So
Barlow,
Femina,
yeah. Do we not use like other plagiarism checkers? Like I have Grammarly, and that's what I typically use for my papers and such. Can I not just use that, or it has to be through Blackboard?
Grammarly checks for plagiarism?
Yeah, it has a plagiarism check.
I didn't know that.
Paper, yeah.
I usually do that for my students, and it has worked in the past.
Yeah, so if you've got a different program that's checking for plagiarism and you can run that report and send it to us, that's fine. I mean, I assume that anything that's in our institutional database would be showing up in there. Probably, yeah, let's just say that's fine. And I'll do some investigating to make sure that it's not missing some things. And then once I feel comfortable, I'll be like, okay, that's fine. But yeah, for now, let's give it a try and let's see how that goes. So good question. So those are the chair forms. The only form that the student has to do is the permission form. So this was the form that used to show in the thesis or dissertation where they signed off, and it gave the permissions that the library had in terms of making copies of the document available. So we started this last summer. We actually consulted with the library, and we actually are giving students more options now in terms of the permissions to copy and share and so forth. So once a student is emailed that their thesis or dissertation has been approved, then I attach this form to that email for them, and they print it and submit it with their final hard copy. just a few more pieces of just miscellaneous pieces of information, and then we'll have some time for some questions from you all. So one thing that I wanted to make sure is that y'all are making sure that your students are aware of the UCA thesis dissertation guide, and that you're encouraging them to look at it and use it as a part of preparing their document. I also want to strongly encourage you to either encourage or require that your students have an editor, or that they purchase Grammarly, so that their writing, their grammar and all is correct in the document. And then I also want you to be aware that just as of a few weeks ago, the library will no longer be binding extra copies. And what I mean is students turn in one hard copy to us at the graduate school. That is the only copy that the library will send off for binding. So if students want their own personal copies, or if they want to purchase a copy for you as their chair or for your department, then they will have to do that using another source other than the library. I know that at the time when they're uploading to ProQuest, they can order copies through ProQuest. I also know that there are other thesis dissertation binderies, I don't know what they're called, on the internet. I had students I know at Ole Miss that used to send theirs to a company. They'd send a digital and then they'd print it, bind it, and send it back to them. There may be some places here in Conway, I don't know. I don't want to get into the like it'll feel like I'm doing a commercial for local folks. So I would just say maybe encourage your students to look around, but I always know that ProQuest is an option, as well as other companies on the internet for printing that. And then I think my last topic is what if. And so this is, what happens if the student cannot meet the defense deadline. So they were planning to graduate this semester, but they're not going to, because they're not going to meet the deadlines. So what are some of the options that we have for those students? So first of all, as the chair, you can request a week extension for the defense and or the ProQuest upload. This doesn't change the deadline for submitting the hard copy, like that still stays at August 8th, but you can request that extension and give a little bit of a reasoning behind the, you can give a justification for the request. Now, if everybody requests a week extension, we've got problems, because then I don't have time to get everything checked and ready to go. But, if one or two students need an extra week, that's not a problem. If that one more week is not going to help students, so in terms of fall semester, what are our options? One option is for students to defend and upload to ProQuest by August 15th. That allows me a little bit of time, about a week, to work with them to get the final edits and things done. And if they submit the hard copy to us by the first day of fall classes, then they don't have to register for thesis or dissertation hours during the fall semester. They still will graduate in December, so they'll have that December graduation date, but this way they don't have to pay the tuition. Otherwise, if their thesis dissertation activity goes into fall semester, so fall classes have started and they're doing something, whatever it is, they're going to have to register for at least 1 hour of thesis or dissertation credit. And then we always get the question, if this student applied to graduate this semester, but they're not going to, likely will graduate next semester, will they have to pay the graduation application fee again? And the answer to that is yes. So that money is not refundable. We don't transfer it over. They pay the fee again. So with that, I will stop talking and see if we have questions. I will also stop sharing my screen so that I can see you all. All right. So let's see, there's a couple of things maybe in the chat. Oh, Lewis, of course, Lewis put something in the chat for me. Thank you, friend Lewis. This is how to use the Grammarly plagiarism detector. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'd never used it before, so I had to go and check it out. So I've got it marked too here. I always use the tool in Blackboard.
So the students who are graduating this summer, they already have this session this year, or no?
So I haven't done this session this semester. I did it in the spring and I did it in the fall. And I did it for all students in thesis and dissertation. So it was not specific to you're graduating this semester. It was for all stages. And so they had the opportunity to attend or to watch that recording. Those recordings are on our YouTube channel. So probably, Jennifer, we should make a note to send out the latest recording for that to students, since I'm not doing a special session for students this time. Yep.
Question about what the manuscripts are supposed to look like when you put them into a chapter. Are they, you know, what if they're already published and it's kind of a print or a reprint sort of acceptable, or is it the document that you sent into the journal?
If they've already been published, then we need to make sure that we have permission to reprint. And so we'd have to get that, we'd have to have the student, you and the student would have to get something from the journal that says it's okay to reprint. And then we haven't gotten as far as what it should look like when it's in there. So
isn't it often the case that if that happens, you just send what you sent to the journal initially, like the Word document?
We could.
That's what I've done at other places.
Are you talking about the preprint, Erin?
No, even just
No, the submitted.
the submitted manuscript as a Word document. So then
Mhm.
it would look very similar to the format of.
Oh, I see. I was thinking, do you still have to request permission if the student uses the preprint rather than the
If
accepted?
it's already published in the in a journal, I would like to have written something in
Okay.
writing that says that they're okay with this being reprinted in a thesis or a dissertation, regardless of whether it's the Word document that went in or it's some, you know, if you put the digital version in there, like we need that documentation.
Okay.
And then in terms of what it looks like in there, like me personally, I like for the whole document to kind of look the same. So if it were my student, I would be like, okay, put this Word document version in there. But you may look at it and think, I don't really care. And my student doesn't care. And it's so much easier if we just put this version in. And I'll have to live with that. Like as the graduate dean, I'll have to be like, oh, okay, I can let that go, right? And life goes on. So to me, what's most important is that we have permission to put it in there from the beginning.
And I remember last year we used a figure from a published manuscript in the introduction, and for that we had to get a permission.
Yep.
So it wasn't
Yes.
the entire introduction, just the figure.
That's true of any figures or tables. If you are getting them, or images even, if you're getting them from another source, we have to have permission to reprint those. And it really depends on the copyright information that a journal has or how it's set up on the internet if you're grabbing things. So that's actually on the checklist. That's one of the items that if you have figures, tables, that you get permission to reprint. The same thing is true of a survey. A lot of times students will put a survey in an appendix, which is fine at the proposal stage because, you know, chairs and committee members want to see the survey and the items to make sure it's appropriate for what they're doing. When it comes to the thesis or the dissertation itself, you know, that is a copyrighted, it's out there, published piece. And so permission to use a survey is not the same thing as permission to reprint a survey. And so a lot of times students end up pulling surveys out of the appendices at the end because they didn't have permission to reprint. And that's okay because that survey is available somewhere else. And so as long as you have the citation for it, you're good. You don't have to actually have it as an appendix. But if you do, then we're going to ask, do you have permission to reprint the survey? What are some other questions that you all have?
So the checklist that you have available, that I assume that's something a student could go to the graduate school website and find easily. Is that correct?
Well, not today, but by tomorrow it'll be there.
Oh, so the checklist is new.
I just created that last week.
Okay, great.
It is hot off the press. So I'll send it to you all because you're here today. You'll get it, and we'll send it to the students. But if you don't say anything about it, they're not going to look at it, right? So I'm asking you all to work with them to address those things, because I shouldn't have to say over and over and over. And this is one of the things I say repeatedly. The second page of the document is numbered at the bottom with the lowercase Roman numeral 2. Like, I shouldn't have to do that. Like, they should be able to figure that out, and it can be done early in this process. So I'm hopeful that I can get back with you all after this semester. So after you've used this checklist, or after you've facilitated your student using it, and get some feedback from you all in terms of, item number 20, my students had no idea what this was talking about. Or item number 4, it's like, I want to get some feedback from you all, since this is the first time we're putting this in the hands of you all for this purpose. We tried a checklist a few years ago. It was a little bit different. It didn't work. So I'm hopeful that this will work, because it does actually represent the things that I find myself saying over and over and over. And you can tell that, like in the spring, how many did we have, Jennifer? Like 25 or something. Like, it was 3 times the normal number. And
a lot.
It was a lot.
A lot.
And you just say this stuff. And y'all, I mean, like, I get some, and they'll have like, here's page 2, and the next page is also page 2. I don't even know how you do that. And so just paying attention to page numbers would help. So I'll send that to you all in an email. We will also send it to students, but we will also add it to our website on our thesis dissertation information page, but that will probably make it tomorrow.
So one thing that I've had 2 students try to do is to use the template that was provided.
Mm-hmm. Which I
And
think needs updating.
it did not go well, because the formatting in it was specific to the version of Word that it was created in, and it did not work well with the version of Word they were using.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm telling them not to use that template now, which is unfortunate, because they would be really nice, because it could resolve a lot of these issues too, to have a template that works. But the frustration is they ended up having to rewrite their whole table of contents and so forth with it, and it didn't say, it actually added more time than saving them time.
Yeah, so it may be that I need to just take that down. The initial thought was a lot of students did not know how to go from having lowercase Roman numerals for the front matter to then having regular Arabic numbers on the main document. So they didn't know how to make that change, and they didn't know how to make it start over. So you start over with page 1, so the thought was, okay, let's create this document. So then that's done for them. But if it's causing more problems than it's worth, then I can certainly take that down. And eventually maybe, I always like look things up on YouTube. And so maybe we should have some helpful YouTube sites. Our students don't also know to like use a page break. So they'll sit there and hit enter or return over and over and over to get to the next page, instead of using a page break. And well, then as soon as something shifts, everything's messed up. So there's some basic kind of word skills that not all of them, but many of them, it's surprising to me how many of them need some help with. And so we can work to develop some type of toolkit or something to help with some of those things, to replace like the intent of that document. So Lewis, thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, and to maybe even just save it as a PDF, just as an example, may be really helpful, but not as a template unless we were going to update that. And then we want to make sure maybe there's even though it should go between Mac and PC, that there's a Mac version that was created on a Mac and a PC version that was created on a PC.
I can't do all that. So we're just going to take it down.
Exactly, because that was the problems we were having with that. And it just that we ended up starting over, and it was extensive. It was much more work than if they just started from scratch. So,
okay.
All right.
Any other comments or questions from y'all today? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question too about, and so maybe I shouldn't be using this, but I also downloaded the front matter template.
That's what he's talking about.
Okay,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's still useful, but there is like the permission page is on there. So you said
Yeah, that needs to be
now,
updated.
so
Mhm.
that shouldn't be in there.
Yep.
Okay, and then the second page that is the list the committee members,
That-
is that should also be not in there?
Okay, I need to take it out. Yep.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I'll take those out. I'll save it as a PDF and then I'll put it up as an example instead of a template. And that's the thing, like these kids are looking for examples. And so they use somebody else's old thesis or dissertation and they see these things in there and we're, you know, we're taking these out. So, and again, that's to streamline the process because you talk about a nightmare, having them put a signature page in there that actually had the signatures. That was tough for some folks. So trying to streamline that process, you know, we're getting there. Other comments or questions? Well, I'll just say that one, I appreciate y'all coming here this afternoon and joining me, but two, I really, really appreciate all the work that you're doing to support the students in this process because I know it is a lot of work. It's a lot of time. It's very rewarding, but it is a lot of time. So I appreciate that you all are doing this for your students and I'll get you this access to this recording and this PowerPoint, et cetera, within the next 24 hours, okay? All right, thank you. Y'all have a good one.